Hello, your friendly neighborhood host JT Wheatley here again, back for another episode of the History of Comic Books podcast. This time, the history of the Watchmen. Now, in this episode, we'll be looking into the classic comic book, The Watchmen. I should note that while I'm not giving out a full plot synopsis for this, there will be spoilers throughout, and it's highly encouraged to read the book before listening to this episode. Heck, read the book anyway, because it's one of the best, if not the best, comic books ever made. With that, on with the show. Whenever someone thinks of one of the greatest, if not the greatest, comic book stories of all time, The Watchmen by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons immediately comes to mind. A 12-issue epic that breaks down the superhero genre, and like all great works, it all began with its creators, Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. Alan Moore was born on November 16, 1953 in Northampton, England, to a working-class family. Despite growing up in the poverty-stricken boroughs, Moore stated he loved living there and was an avid reader from a young age. Eventually, reading led him to comic books, from British ones like Topper and Breezer, but also American imports like The Flash and The Fantastic Four. Soon he was writing his own poetry and stories, contributing to fanzines, and even named his own fanzine, The Embryo. While working odd jobs as an adult, he started to work in comic books, first in fanzines, producing Aeon E. Mouse for the local paper and St. Pancras Bear, a parody of the Paddington Bear. However, wanting to actually get into comic book business for real, he reached out to a childhood friend and comic book writer, Steve Moore, no relation, who suggested he submit a script to 2000 AD, the popular British comic book. Moore produced the script for its stalwart character, Judge Dredd, and while the magazine's editor, Alan Grant, saw no need for another Dredd writer, he did see promise in Moore's work. Soon, Moore was writing for Future Shocks, while also contributing to Doctor Who Weekly, becoming a freelance writer in the industry. It also led him to meet Dave Gibbons. Dave Gibbons was born David Chess Gibbons on April 14, 1969 in London, England. The son of a town planner and a secretary, he began to read comic books as a 7-year-old and self-taught himself to be an illustrator. As an adult, he worked as a building surveyor before moving into the comic book industry. First working in underground British comics like IPC and DC Thompson, before moving on to Dan Dare, a classic British comic, and in 2000 AD, where he co-created Rogue Trooper with Jerry Finley Day. It was around this time he met Alan Moore at the 1980 Marvel Comics convention at the Royal Horticultural Hall in central London, introduced by Alan's friend Steve Moore. According to Gibbons, the first thing he noticed about Alan Moore was just how much hair he had, a trademark look for the writer. Together they would work on Tharg's Future Shock shorts, and later Gibbons was approached by Dee Skin, the editor-in-chief of Marvel UK, for work on Warrior, with Alan Moore on his Marvel Man revival. However, Gibbons was too busy at the time. Nevertheless, Moore and Gibbons continued to meet at the Society of Stray Illustrators at Comic Mart in Westminster. Gibbons would later work at DC on Green Lantern, which he deemed too soap opera-ish, though he did, with writer Lynn Mean, make John Stewart the primary character in Green Lantern number 182. He would leave the series but come back for a backup story with Mogo Doesn't Socialize with Alan Moore in Green Lantern number 188. Alan Moore also did a treatment for the proposed Martian Manhunter story at DC but was turned down. However, he was then offered Swamp Thing, which he would go on to revive to high acclaim. Moore then worked on Challengers of the Unknown with Gibbons again, and also on the classic Superman story for The Man Who Has Everything in the Superman Annual number 11 in 1985. Finally, they met again in the 1984 Chicago convention over a story idea. It was what would become The Watchmen. Originally, Alan Moore wanted to use the MLJ Archie Comics characters, the Mighty Crusaders, with a treatment of the character The Shield being found murdered and his fellow superheroes investigating it. Moore wanted to use more average superheroes, but then decided on the Charlton ones, specifically Captain Atom, Blue Beetle, and The Question, all three co-created by the legendary Steve Ditko, which DC had recently acquired the rights to. He wanted to craft a realistic and political book, one that explored what the world would really be like if superheroes did exist, along with the legal system. Alan Moore presented the idea to Dick Giordano, DC's managing editor, who agreed to produce it but rejected the use of the Charlton characters, which DC had plans on working into the DC universe, which would happen with Crisis of Infinite Earths. However, Moore and Gibbons would later recount that creating original characters for the Watchmen was hugely liberating, allowing them the freedom to really do what they wanted. It was also Dave Gibbons who approached Dick Giordano about penciling the series when he heard about it, which Alan Moore instantly agreed to. Thus, with Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons together, the series was crafted. Moore started to write the series early, hoping to avoid publishing delays like Camelot 3000, a previous DC Maxi series, while Gibbons designed the characters to make them easy to draw, with Moore trusting him on specific details. However, Moore still wrote very detailed scripts for Gibbons to work with, but often ended them with the phrase, "If it doesn't work for you, do what you think is best." However, Gibbons stuck to the script and only altered one change at the Moore's suggestion in condensing Ozymandias' narration when Rorschach tried to sneak up on him. Gibbons even managed to sneak in the background details which Moore admitted he didn't notice till years later. One artistic detail that was unique for the time, and even today, was the 9-panel layout, allowing for dense storytelling, something Gibbons preferred. Meanwhile, Moore was constantly calling on other comic book creators like Neil Gaiman for research questions. From the original treatment that was first featured, the Charlton characters, Captain Atom was reimagined as Dr. Manhattan, the Blue Beetle as Night Owl, and the Questioner as Rorschach. The idea behind Dr. Manhattan, who was named after the Manhattan Project, was that he would be the first superhero with actual superpowers in this universe, and as a result he doesn't age, though his girlfriends keep getting younger. He will be used from everything to the Vietnam War, which the U.S. wins, thanks to him, and the police strike of 1977, which leads to the anti-superhero law. For the Soviet Union, he is considered a weapon of the United States, plus as a result of superheroes existing, the timeline has changed, with the United States having won the Vietnam War and Richard Nixon still president, Watergate having never been exposed. Ozymandias was originally Thunderbolt. Really 37-year-old Peter Cannon is considered the perfect human. Possessing a brilliant intellect, he saw the backlash against superheroes coming and quietly retired, revealing his identity to the world. He then built a media empire around merchandising his likeness. Imagine how rich Superman or Batman would be if they could do the same. Seriously, they make billions in sales. Originally, he was also an anti-nuke and opposed to Captain Atom/Dr. Manhattan, as he is literally the human embodiment of a nuclear bomb. Moore changed his name to Ozymandias as he felt it was more grandeur, and as a reference to the title of issue number 11, Look on My Works, Ye Mighty in Despair, which featured the attack of New York City. He was also of German descent and thought of his name after taking peyote with the Bruises in South America, thus he's also a lover of youth culture. Night Owl was meant to be the most human of the group, with the noblest, strongest character. He is actually the second generation, like the Blue Beetle, taking up the name of the original Night Owl, who has retired and wonders if becoming a superhero is the part of some bizarre adolescent fantasy, having become paranoid of it. Both superheroes are now friends, and with the original having written an autobiography, Under the Hood, detailing his life, along with his past friendships with the Minutemen. Moore was inspired to model the original Night Owl after Will Eisner, who was also used in the comic book to detail the past history of superheroes. The Question, Rorschach, is a vigilante who still operates outside the law after the anti-superhero law of 1977, with a black and white sense of justice very much in line with the original Steve Ditko character. When he was reimagined as Rorschach, his name was inspired by the psychological blot test in which the patients are asked to look at different black and white shapes and describe what they see. As a result of his philosophy, Moore didn't foresee his death till the 4th issue of writing, realizing his uncompromising nature would lead to it. Originally, his entire costume was a Rorschach test before being reduced to just his mask. His alternative identity is that of a protester who carries a placard throughout New York City decrying the end of the world while living in a seedy apartment eating canned food. According to Gibbons, Rorschach was his favorite character to draw because he just had to draw his hat and his face blots and to fill out the rest. Peacemaker / the Comedian was first imagined as a low-key government operative who turns more militaristic and aggressive than his other superheroes, even becoming an assassin. Originally inspired by the hero in Wasp by Eric Frank Russell, he is 50 years old in the book but still well-built. It is his murder that launches the whole story, with Rorschach investigating it as he admires the comedian as a hero. Nightshade / Silk Spectre was the character Moore knew the least about at first, as he originally just needed a female superhero to be Captain Atom / Dr. Manhattan's girlfriend. He gave her a distinctly 80s look at one point, and thought about returning Captain Atom to his classic golden look and response as well over his modern silver one. However, when she was reimagined as Silk Spectre, that was where Moore and Gibbons developed the character, as she would become another second-generation superhero like Night Owl, with her mother being the original Silk Spectre. Being pushed into the role by her mother, who has since remarried and is now living on the West Coast, she is 35 and the lover of Dr. Manhattan. Finally, there was the Minutemen, the original superhero team of 1944, which is described as simpler times, consisting of the original Night Owl and Silk Spectre, along with Brother Knight, Dollar Bill, the Comedian, Mothman, Captain Metropolis, Silhouette, and the Hooded Justice. While meant to be a symbol of the Golden Age superheroes, Moore and Gibbons managed to slip in some adult commentary, with Dollar Bill being a bank-sponsored superhero who has an outlandish costume designed by them, consisting of a cape that gets him killed when he's trapped in a revolving door, allowing robbers to shoot him to death. Mothman is an alcoholic and is eventually institutionalized for mental problems, while Captain Metropolis and the Hooded Justice are gay lovers in secret. Silhouette is also a lesbian who is forced to leave the Minutemen after she is outed. For the subplot, Tales of the Black Freighter, Dave Gibbons came up with the idea of pirates comics in The Watchmen, arguing there wouldn't be superhero ones since they were real in The Watchmen, along with the name Night Owl, although Alan Moore came up with the spelling of Nite. The logo was designed by Gibbons based on Alan's name and design, which would be incorporated to mimic the Doomsday Clock, a symbol of the possibility of a man-made disaster. He also modeled the look of the comedian after Groucho Marx, while changing the costume from a military one to a leather costume. One problem DC had was selling ad space in the Watchmen comic, leaving an additional 9 pages per issue. Thus, it was filled in with supplemental pieces, such as excerpts from the original Night Owl biography Under the Red Hood to flesh out the world. Lin Weed also decided against the letters page, believing it was unfair considering it was a maxi series that will eventually end. The pirate comic would soon become a major subplot in the story, and John Higgins was hired as the colorist, with Lin Weed the editor, with Dick Giordano remaining on as managing editor, though he stated he mostly stayed out of Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' way. To quote Giordano, "Who copy edits Alan Moore, for goodness sakes?" Higgins had previously worked on 2000 AD and Judge Dredd, and he wanted to do Dr. Manhattan in a soft blue light. Moore's script was 91 pages, and he and Gibbons made the comic exactly as they wanted. Higgins avoided primary colors as they were considered too bright and cartoony, and considering the moral gray areas of the Watchmen explored, having the secondary, thus mixed colors worked better. As the issue started to come out, with the first on September 1986, legends like Jill Kane and Julie Swartz openly praised it, along with Walter Simonson, Frank Miller, and Howard Chaykin. Chaykin said it was frickin' A, though he didn't use the word frickin' at a New York meeting. Archie Goodwin reportedly loved it so much he sent a garbage bag as a fan letter. Meanwhile, Alan Moore was still working on the Swamp Thing, Batman the Killing Joke, and other DC works. This was impressive when the issue Phil for Symmetry came out, which literally began and ended in the same way. Moore wrote it 2 pages at a time and had to have the script sent by taxi to Gibbons at $100 a trip since he lived 50 miles from Moore. While Gibbons went to the San Diego Comic Convention, they had to be airmailed to him. When no scripts arrived one day, Gibbons enjoyed a small break, though Dick Giordano mocked him for it. It was this piecemeal approach, though, that did lead to The Watchmen being delayed, as by issue number 5 and number 6 were out, issue number 9 was still being written. At one point, he would complain to Moore to feed him, and even had his wife and son draw the panel grids with the final issues to help him meet the deadlines. Despite this effort, the last issue of The Watchmen, number 12, would be late by 1 month, coming out in October of 1987. Despite these delays, the fan reaction was overwhelming whenever Gibbons went to San Diego or the Atlanta conventions. Gibbons would call it the most complex work of his career, as did Higgins. Both artists and colorists worked closely together, with both having children around the same age who could play together. He started to make color notes on everything, including the Sugar Cube wrappers. Higgins later darkened the colors for Walter Kovac's story and used mostly watercolor as his technique. Nevertheless, Higgins would be disappointed with the coloring in the first printing, and when the comic was set to be re-released in 2005 for a Prestige Absolute Edition, he leaped at the chance to fix it. For the Owl ship, the second Night Owl's vehicle, Gibbons actually sketched out a workable design for the vehicle so to make it as realistic as possible. As a major theme of The Watchmen was foreshadowing, from the Gordian knot story in which Alexander the Great, the hero of Ozymandias, was challenged to untie a knot, claiming whoever did it could rule the world. Alexander simply cut it in half with his sword. A painting of this is figured prominently in the book, along with the Gordian Knot Lock Company being created in the comic. Gibbons discovered the Gale crater on Mars from a photograph and noticed how much it resembled a smiley face, thus working that into the story as well as the place where Dr. Manhattan goes on to Mars. Much of this was inspired by William S. Burroughs, who Alan Moore admired for his use of symbolism throughout his work. Gibbons also got inspiration from the Grateful Dead album cover Aximaxica, a palindrome or a word that is spelled the same way forwards and backwards, inspiring the Fearful Symmetry issue. It also included skull and crossbones in the center and a Tales of the Rum Runners album cover as well. One problem that came with The Watchmen was the ending, which Alan Moore realized was similar to the classic Outer Limits TV episode, The Architects of Fear, in which a group of scientists decided to create a fake alien invasion to unite the world in peace. Alan Moore didn't realize this at first and was ironically inspired by President Ronald Reagan's speech about what would happen